G'day guys, and welcome to this interview episode of Aussie English. So today I have special guest Christian from Canguro English. It is my pleasure to chat to him today all about a course plan that I sort of have in the future, as well as language learning, differences between Portuguese and Spanish. And we sort of get into the nitty-gritty about what the important aspects of developing fluency are. So I recently had an idea for creating a fluency course, a course specifically with the purpose of helping you develop your fluency with the English you have now, right? Without you having to learn anything more in terms of grammar or vocabulary, but more developing the English that you already have and working on your fluency. And so I told Christian about that, and he was like, "Oh, can we talk about that in an interview episode?" So we did this a few months ago. He chucked it up on his podcast, but I thought today I'll put it up on mine. This is the first half of my interview with Christian from Canguro English. Let's go.
Mr. Pete Smithson, thank you very much for talking to me today.
It's Dr. Pete Smithson.
I keep forgetting about that. I'm sorry. Dr. Okay. Smithson, how are you today?
I'm good. That's like the only time I can use anything that I got out of 12 years at university. So I have to use it every now and then. When people say Mr., I'm like,
it must be like super satisfying if you go to one of those like web forms and you have to choose, Mr., Mrs., and you do a doctor.
I feel like I shouldn't. I'm always like, are they going to be, is it going to come up and it'll be a legal thing? And they'll be like, well, technically, you're not a doctor. So I'm always just like, Mr., whatever.
I saw a thing on Twitter where there was this woman, and she said that she ran into an ex-boyfriend, and the ex-boyfriend said, I haven't seen you in ages. Is it Miss or Mrs.? He replied, actually, it's doctor, right?
Boom,
right? But then, and I was like, boom. But then everyone on Twitter was like, he still likes you. He was trying to find out if you're single, you idiot.
Yeah, all of that knowledge, and you've lost all of the common sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, far out.
So, the reason we're chatting is because the other day we were talking on Facebook, and you mentioned that you're thinking about developing this course for people so that they can actually use the English that they have right now, but also at the same time improve their English, but basically immediately.
Well, I'll get the book so that I can actually reference it properly, because I fell in love with this guy. So this guy's name is Boris Shechtman. I think he's a Russian guy, but he has a Jewish name. So for anyone watching, here's the book, okay? But it's called How to Improve Your Foreign Language Immediately. It's a very short read, but it's amazing. It blew my mind because I obviously was cruising around on Amazon looking for books about language learning and how to, I don't know, I get pretty sick of, and I've got a few books up here on language learning, but a lot of them are always like, these are the kinds of dictionaries you should use, and make sure that you speak to people. Don't just spend all your time on it. It's like obvious stuff, but it never seems like actionable information that you can be like, well, what can I actually go out there and do to improve the way in which I speak? It seems like it's always aimed at basic, this is how to learn a language, not how to use it. But this guy's really good because he worked for the FSI. I think it's like the Foreign or FIS.
Yeah, the Foreign Services Institute, yeah.
Foreign Services Institute in America, training up diplomats to speak Russian. So, and they had to speak like at a native level, if not higher, I think, about very complicated stuff. So, it was no holds barred language teaching. But the book, at least this one, which I sort of want to center the course on, the idea that I had was all of these sort of small ideas that are implementable straight away, immediately, that you could, learn now, watch a small video, read the book, go outside and use, and immediately improve your language. So I thought it was awesome. Yeah. Anyway, one of the things in there, I guess, was, I think, and this is one of those things we were talking about yesterday or the day before, was that his first rule here is show your stuff, which is effectively, if you're in a conversation with someone, if I were to say to you, how are you going, Christian? What are you going to say back?
Well, I would probably say, yeah, fine. How are you?
Exactly. So at least it goes back and forth, but you're not going to just say good, right? Like it's going to be
good.
So I think a lot of people focus on I need to respond, and they give you the sort of the smallest amount possible to get like a pass, like in a test. It's like, I put an answer in the box. And he was saying that you need to change, at least with that sort of rule, show your stuff. It was more show what you're capable of. So you would, instead of just saying something like, how's it going? Yeah, good. And you would say something, yeah, I've been great. Recently I've been doing this and I've started doing this and my day was like this. Or, you would go down a bunch of different alleys, talk about a bunch of different things and then throw it back so that the speaker, it's kind of like a fight, right? Or it's almost like a dance together where it's equal parts. It's not just one person dominates and the other person gets, the submissive position, right?
Yeah, I love that because as you say, this is a technique that doesn't require any new knowledge or any study. It's more of like a mindset.
Exactly.
And in fact, I've used this technique myself, but only in a very specific way. I used it when for exam preparation, because what can happen in an exam is, because, for example, in a lot of exams, there's parts where they have to speak with a partner. Mm-hmm. And what can happen is if you have a partner with a very dominant personality or with a very high level of English, they can take over this whole section of the exam. And so you're left basically saying nothing, right? Yeah. And so I always encourage people, when you're in the exam and they say, how are you? You just launch into it, a big monologue, let them tell you to stop.
Exactly. Well, I had to remember that. I remember doing my French exam back in year 12 and I was crapping myself, because I was like, oh my God, there's going to be two French natives sitting across the desk interviewing me effectively about different things in French. And I have no idea what it's going to be about. But it was always that, just prepare to have, they're going to ask you about you, generally. They're not just going to, what do you think of NASA? It's just going to be something like, tell us about your family.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so you just have to have things prepared. And this is sort of a few of those other rules in here are sort of like build your islands, which was develop these sort of islands of subject material that you want to talk about or that you would talk about in your native language. So like your family or your job or your hobbies, develop those so that you're sort of prepared when you meet people and you have a conversation with them and they obviously want to get to know you and say, what do you do? And you're not sitting there crapping yourself like, I've forgotten how to use the present tense. And you don't have to think about it because you've gone away, you've practiced, I do this as a job, I go 7 days a week and blah, blah, blah. You have a whole lot of information that you can just spurt out. And what we were talking about, I think when the light bulb went off for you, or at least I think I saw it in your eyes, was when all of these sorts of rules kind of tie really in deeply with confidence and building confidence, right? Because it's kind of like, we get asked a lot, I assume you get asked a lot, how do I speak more confidently? How do I be more confident with my English? And it's kind of like, you can't really just practice confidence in and of itself, right? Yeah. It's kind of like, you have to practice these kinds of things to be prepared, say, build your islands, be prepared, know what you can talk about you, so that when you speak, it's not so much that you're confident, it's that you know what you're doing and you're not nervous because you have to think and make it up on the spot. And so it's more, I don't think it's confidence, it's being prepared, right?
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that's really interesting for me is how some of these concepts tie into maybe some of the science about the way that maybe children learn languages, because like it seems that, rather than this idea that children or even adults sort of learn languages by sort of memorizing like categories of words like verbs or nouns or maybe memorizing how to conjugate a verb by adding ed for the past. It seems like children and maybe even adults could learn best by learning things in these big kind of chunks. And it's interesting how this island theory fits in with that. It's like you have this pre-prepared kind of like stuff that's just there ready to go. I think it makes sense.
it ties in with the Pareto principle, right? The 80-20 rule of, when you learn the 20%, the most common 20% of the English language is going to be used 80% of the time by people, right? And the other 80% is used only 20% of the time. So you need to spend 80% of your time effectively focusing on that 20% because you're going to be using it 80% of the time. So I think it's that sort of thing where you need to not get distracted by all these unknown words in English or unknown grammar patterns and really spend your time where it's most efficiently used because you're, studying the things that you're going to be using most of the time, because there's no point in being able to nail, the past perfect tense in if clauses or something if you're never going to say it, or at least, it's so uncommon that even if you screw it up, it's going to be so rare that people aren't going to, it's not a big deal in your day, right? But being able to talk about your family or being able to use the present tense, those sorts of things, it's kind of like, well, you're going to be talking about them probably every other day with someone, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, I wonder if really it's more extreme than the Pareto principle. I wonder actually if it's more like 5%, 95%.
I guess it would depend on how many words you say is in English, right? Because that tail end is probably...
Yeah, I mean, there's so many estimates about how many words in total there are. But if you take an estimate, let's say, and this is an extreme estimate, but let's say there's 1 million words in English, and a huge percent of those are archaic or scientific or medical, kind of vocabulary. If you look at, like, they estimate that a well-educated college student knows 40,000 words, and like a normal person like you or me, we know about 20,000 words.
I'd probably be less than
Doctor.
That. But.
Doctor. So if you think that the total could be 1 million, and we know 20,000, but a lot of that's passive vocabulary. Maybe on a day-to-day basis, we're only using, say, 5,000.
I think there was
not really a lot, is it?
Anecdotally, when I do my podcasts more recently, I've been taking the transcripts from my podcasts, and we spoke about this, and running it through a program to look at the complexity of the word uses. So I guess it looks at the frequency of the word. So
really? I didn't know about this.
Yeah, I was asking you, remember, about the if it's better to use the CELTA, is it like what's it called? The CELF measurement, this A1, A2, or if it was that the other version that
the Lexile level.
Yeah, the Lexile one. And so what I was doing was running through all of my transcripts because I wanted to see, like, vocabulary wise, where are they landing in terms of difficulty. And it was really interesting because I kind of had a whole spread from about A2 all the way to C2, but the ones that ended up being the most quote unquote simple, for beginners, were the sporadic conversations where I was, say, just talking about my day or something in a podcast, or maybe even some of the interviews, which were 40 minutes long. When I was just talking with my wife about having our child for the first time, it came up as a level of like B2 or B1 or something, because obviously the vocab we're using in those sorts of conversations one-on-one is much simpler. But when I ran the scripts that I had pre-written about certain topics through the machine, I was getting C1, C2. And so
that's really interesting. And I wonder, my immediate thought is that, we know that there's a big difference between writing and speaking, the language you use. And maybe, when you sit down to write a script, you switch into this, this language mode that's for you, much more advanced.
100%. And because I'm writing them for the podcast, I'm always thinking about how do I use more complicated language in terms of, say, synonyms for words that are rarer, so that the listeners get exposure to them. Because I know that I'm not just pulling out, certain expressions or even complicated synonyms, superfluous, a word like that or something. I'm not just going to really use without sitting there and thinking about it. In a conversation. But when I'm writing a transcript out, I can do that and then give the listeners a bit of more complicated language to go away and study. And so that was interesting. It was like, when you've got time to think, you can structure things a lot more in a way that's much more sophisticated. and complicated. But then when you're just talking one-on-one, quite often the sentences are broken. The tenses are very simple. I bet you if you looked at our thing today, it'd all be probably, the simple present tense, simple past tense, and that'd be about it, right? Maybe some perfect tenses in there as well, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, this is more of a kind of a philosophical question, but, when, like, part of my job is to communicate kind of clear messages. Like, if I'm teaching a student something, I don't want them to be focused on the form of my language. I don't want them to think, well, what does that word mean? And what does that word mean? I want them to be thinking about what I'm trying to teach them. But then, so here's the question. If you have a student and they're only exposed to my sort of limited vocabulary, how does that prepare them to go out into the real world where people are going to perhaps use words like superfluous? This is a struggle, right?
That's where you have to mix it up, right? And it is funny because I notice with some English teachers on, say, YouTube, it's almost like as soon as they get in front of the camera, they speak differently from when I say speak to them in private, and you'll hear them use slang and so I've had to think quite often, especially with doing podcasts, how much do I script it? Because as soon as I do that, it's changing the way in which the language would be used in terms of conversational, everyday English, which is what they're going to run into most of the time. And I'm not really trying to prepare them for, having a really, really wide vocabulary to pass an exam. I want to give them access to the English that's spoken every day in terms of listening comprehension so that they can be better prepared for that. So it is difficult though, because you're like, I want to dumb it down a bit, but at the same time, if they only get used to that level, they're going to be disappointed when they arrive in Australia, for example, and be like, holy crap, no one speaks slowly like Pete. He was too easy to understand. And I get complaints like that. Sometimes I'll be making these episodes and I'm not even thinking about it, and I'll listen back because I'll get complaints. It's too easy to understand you. You speak too slowly, and I'll be like, what the hell are you talking about? I go and listen. And I'm like, man, you've probably been listening to 600 episodes of my podcast. You're just used to my accent. I'm not dumbing it down. That's just how I speak.
No, listen, even my own family, they say to me, Christian, why are you talking to me like I'm an idiot? I can understand English. And I say to them, well, this is how I speak. Like if we went to the pub and had drinks, I would speak exactly like this. Like, maybe I'm just accustomed to it. But there was something which I read recently, which was very scary, is that they did some research about native English speaking teachers who had been in Spain for only 1 year. And after 1 year, these English teachers had already started to use kind of Spanish constructions with English words, changing the way that they spoke to kind of accommodate the Spanish learners.
That screws me up all the time now. And I don't think it's necessarily that accommodation idea there with, for instance, I speak Portuguese probably 90% of the time now with Kel in the house. So I've made that rule a year ago, just Portuguese. I want to get as good as possible so that when Noah's growing up, he'll speak Portuguese and there's no one else around. And for my own sake, I'm just being selfish. Awesome. But now whenever I speak English around my parents or, whatever, quite often I have the structures in my head for Portuguese and I'll just blurt out the English version of it and just be like, that's not an expression in English. Or like, for example, it'd be the same in Spanish, right? You know how they say like, all the two, that was French. They say tous les deux for like, both, right? So sometimes I remember spurting that out. Yeah, I'll have all the two. And people would just be like, all the what? And I'm like, it's gone deep. And so I would love to know more about like cognitively what's going on there, because interestingly too, and you'll probably know more about this than me, but when I spoke French fluently before I learned any Portuguese. And then I dropped French and started doing Portuguese full time. So now when I try and speak French, Portuguese is inserted anywhere I can't think of the word fast enough in French, but I can think of it in Portuguese, even before I think of it in English. So English doesn't taint the waters. It doesn't interrupt anything. But Portuguese seems to be this like big brother that's like beating up his little brother constantly when I try and speak French now. So I'd love to know in terms of like what's going on in my head. Like, is there a certain area where second languages all get put and then they kind of have to like fight for space, right?
It's more. It's actually more about suppression. Like,
yeah, that's right. I remember your video with the balls right in the water.
Exactly. So people think it's the opposite. People think that what the brain is doing is trying to bring up, for example, trying to bring up the Brazilian or bring up the French. But it's the opposite. Your brain is actually trying to push down your English and push down your French so that the Brazilian can, and so that's what it has problems with, because you have to remember that the brain is just a machine, like, for making connections, and the most powerful thing that the brain can do is repeat stuff a lot.
Another funny thing is that, and I remember, I can't remember where I heard it, but a reason people with dementia end up swearing a lot is because apparently that's much deeper in the brain, in the hippocampus. So I think the area in the brain that stores those kind of emotional, like, you stub your foot and you're like, shit, it's like a reaction more than a thought and a sentence. Apparently people with dementia whose brains, they lose the ability to speak English fluently, but they still have those reactions where all of a sudden, they'll bump their toe or something and say, shit. And I think I have the same thing with, what would you call them? Words like well, like, So sometimes when I'm speaking in Portuguese to Kel, I'll be saying something like, que tá fazendo hoje? Porque eu tô achando que, like, and I'll be like, why did I know the word chipu. Chipu is what they say for like, but I use the English tick for some reason and it just pops in there. So
well, I think they're two separate things. So, the reason that the dementia patients would sort of continue to have that vocabulary is because we tend to the words that we learn first in our lives are the words that are really deep in there. So, the reality is that children hear their parents saying shit, damn,
and they're never going to forget,
and they never forget. So those kind of first 1,000 words are like, they become part of your neurology almost. And But the second thing I think is that all of those kind of those like discourse markers and those kind of the feedback that we give when we're in conversation, like and that's it's like
the sound, right? That I think I've noticed that with Spanish speakers, and I have to quite often tell them, guys, or sort that out straight away, because it's very jarring to use the vowel sound e when you're speaking English. You'll be like, I was doing this the other day, e, and it'll be like, whoa, what was that? Get used to the ah.
It's totally totally automatic, right?
It takes a long time, right?
Yeah, like even now, if I'm walking down the street and I'm sort of maybe on my phone or I'm distracted. If I see someone I know, I go, hey, and I'm like, no, wait a minute, it's hola, because it's totally automatic, even after 10 years here.
Yeah, I've had that a few times too, where I've walked out and I'll hear my mum enter in, and I'll hear the in the other room, and I'll be like, oh, that's mum's, cadence of her voice. She's here to see Noah, and Kel will be talking to her, and I'll walk out and be like, hey, tudo bem, mai? Like, how's it going, mum? And she'll be like, what? And I didn't even know. And I'd be like, why? What happened? She's like, he said it in Portuguese. And I'll be like, oh my God. So it is so interesting what the interplay between languages, right? Inside the brain.
Yeah, exactly. But if you were to become a professional interpreter, after like a couple of years, you would switch so easily with no interference, because you just get better at it,
Well, it's just time on the mat, right? We used to say that with jiu-jitsu. The more time spent doing something is you just get so good at it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And well, so this sort of brings us back to that whole kind of thing about you're exactly right. There's so many books, and where the answers seem very obvious. Need to practice, need to read more, etc. But there's not very much in the way of practical things. So that's why I think this stuff from the FSI guys really, really interesting.
Yeah, well, hopefully we're going to develop it into a course and create something, because it seemed like, I think you and I have both been talking about it for a while. There's a lot of stuff online that it's very,
shit.
How would you put it? Sorry? Shit.
Terrible.
Well, there's a lot of stuff out there where it doesn't lead to dramatic change immediately, I would say, right? Like it's almost, and I find this even with my own content at times, I'm like, oh, I've got a lot in here, but I need to also show people how to get the most out of it, how to get the pull the best out of it. And so I think with these sorts of things, when people ask me about confidence and fluency and speaking, it seems like you don't need to necessarily learn more English to improve those things. It's more about improving how you have conversations. So it is interesting how it's more of a psychological thing and a behavioral thing than necessarily an English coach or English teacher. I'll give you one lesson about this phrase or this tense and you'll be fine speaking in public or whatever.
Yeah, look, exactly. And I think there's a lesson for students as well, right? It's like, ask yourself, when you watch these videos that are like, top 10 words you need in business or, 10 different ways to say goodbye, after watching that video, does that really kind of help you to do anything really?
It's entertainment, right? Like you don't necessarily watch, I don't know, like The Walking Dead to learn about science or medicine, right? You kind of watch it because it's a laugh and it's good fun. And that's the battle I have a lot of the time with YouTube videos. I'm like, I kind of need to make something that people are going to click on and enjoy watching, but then get sucked in for the long term and are going to end up putting in the time to improve their language, right? And so there's that fine line between entertainment and education, and it's
it's really tough. It's really tough. Yeah. I mean, how can you take something that's so big, like learning a language, and also that's really hard? How can you make it entertaining? And in fact, I know that there's lots of teachers out there who would say, well, it's not entertaining. If you give people the idea that learning should always be fun, then that's not good either.
I was reading a book today. In fact, I will pull it up so that I don't screw up this guy's name. And I don't know, can I swear?
I think so.
So the book is called Everything is Fucked by Mark Manson. So he's the guy who wrote How to Stop Giving a Shit.
Okay. My sister read that book. She said it was really good.
It is. He's a really good writer. This one, Everything is fucked, is about hope. And he had a big section. I just finished it today listening to Audible whilst out walking. He had a big section about happiness and how he thinks, it's oversold and that no one's ever truly going to be happy because we adjust. There were some really good nuggets in there. And one of them was firing a shot at everyone who says, you can get fluent in 3 months, or you can get, you can learn how to, he was targeting someone who learnt a few chess moves and ended up beating some high-ranked chess guy after a month of playing it, and then walked away and was like, yeah, I've done that, tick. And he's kind of like, it's the wrong attitude to have, because you've got to be in it for the long haul and the improvement constantly, and the fact that there is pain in there constantly, but that's how you get value out of it, right? Because you keep overcoming these things. But two sort of anecdotes that were interesting from scientific studies that were done, he was talking about in this book. There was a blue dot test that they did, a study where they had people come in and they had them press a button saying the dot they're shown on the screen is blue or it's not blue. And they show them, purple and blue dots. Have you heard of this study?
No.
So initially, I think they matched them at about 50-50. And they show them 1,000 of these and they press it. And then after that, they start showing people a range of different shades between the purple and the blue. And they don't necessarily keep the numbers even. And the funny thing was, even when that happened, they kept trying to even it out, saying that half as many were blue. And then after that, they showed them pictures of people who were happy versus sad. And they did the same thing. They were trying to find a balance there. So half were sad, half were happy. But even in the end, after that, they showed them just happy faces. And they were still trying to adjust it to show that there were unhappy ones. And then he said, too, that there was another study that I think it was back in the 80s or the 90s that people had buzzers. What are they called again? Those things that you put on you get texted or something.
Oh, pages.
Pages. Yeah, I never had one. It was before my time, but pages. And they'd get paged twice a day and have to say how they were feeling, rated out of 10.
Yeah.
And he was like, no matter what had happened, pretty much everyone said 7. So their mother had died, and it would be like, for a few days, 2, 2, 5, 7. Or they won the lottery, and it would be like 10, 9, 5, 7, 7, 7, 7. So the point of that was both these sort of studies was that you end up balancing out, or trying to balance out and find that middle ground. So even if you do say, win the lottery or get fluent in English, it's not, you have to stop looking at it like, once I finally get there, I'll be happy and everything will be good. Because even if it is, it'll be a very short period of time and then you'll be back to normal, right? The human mind, and that's what keeps us moving forward as human beings. It's almost like we're cursed to never be a 10 out of 10 permanently in terms of happiness. So we keep going for it, right? You got the carrot in front of you. And so I think that there's a story in there somewhere in that mix of stories for working on your fluency in English and knowing that it takes a long time, right?
Yeah, probably the story is that no matter where your English is, right? If your English is really terrible and you've just started learning English and you can only say basic sentences, you can still feel like a 7, right? Because it's like that initial feeling of it's great, I can go and buy a coffee or whatever, and even after you've been learning English for 20 years and you're really fluent and you've got a great pronunciation, you'll still feel like a 7 because there's certain places where you'll struggle. So maybe the takeaway is that you should feel good all the time during the process, maybe.
Or at least realize that, right? And keep aiming to improve, and just know that even as you do improve, don't wait for a time when you're feeling, 100% bliss, right? Because
it's never going to happen.
It's probably not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's definitely one of those things where, the more you learn, the more you realize how much there is to learn, right?
Yeah, the curse of knowledge, right? Or the curse of wisdom. I find that all the time. Did you have that with Spanish when you first started? And this is another tangent we can go off in, but I always feel like I remember walking into my sister's house recently and she's like, I don't know how you speak Portuguese like that. I'm so horrible at languages. I could never do that. And I'd be like, you're saying that to me in a language fluently. Like, is the contradiction here just not any more obvious? Like, how are we communicating? It's not sign language. You're using, and that's a language. You're saying this to me in English. So you're obviously pretty good at it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think part of that as well is, the Australian culture, like most Anglo-Saxon cultures, there's no real culture for learning another language. So for most people, I mean, like when I go to Australia and, people are like, oh, you live in Spain, you speak Spanish. Oh my God. It's like I won the Nobel Prize just because I can speak, another language whereas
bow down to the genius.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what they don't realize is that most people in the world speak 2 or 3 or 4 languages. We're the ones that are weird, the monolinguals.
Yeah.
Yeah. But,
exactly.
Well, to answer your question, I remember I'd been living here for about 3 months and we were looking for a Spanish teacher. And we found this American woman who was teaching Spanish. And so we had a first meeting with her to plan the classes and how often we'd come to class. And she said to us in English, so how's your Spanish right now? And I remember saying to her, man, I can't really speak that much, but my vocabulary is excellent. That's what I said to her. and back then I probably knew how to say like dog and car and barbecue but for me, it was excellent. So my ignorance was enormous in that respect. Enormous.
Well, it feels like that all the time. Kel is always telling me, oh, your Portuguese is so good. And I'm always like, but, or like, what, for a gringo, right? Like, she's like, no, it's really good. And I'm like, but I constantly am aware self-consciously of where my flaws are, what I don't know. Like at the moment, I'm reading this book, for example, about one of the worst jails in Brazil, and it had a tragic story. But anyway, I'm going through it and highlighting all the words in it, and I'm like, I've read 100 pages and I still haven't hit a page where I don't know a single word. But it is funny when you break that down, because it's kind of like, for me to get to that point statistically, you know, if you would say each page would have 500 words on it, that would mean I'd have to have the mastery of something like, 20,000 words in Portuguese, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you have to remind yourself how far you've come, right? And still be like, right, there's a bit to go, but.
Well, I'm curious, how many of those words that you've highlighted can you guess the meaning from the context?
Yeah, well, a lot of them I highlight because I'm unsure. Okay. And so I want to verify anyway. So I'll try quite often. I do, like, again, we can talk about how to get vocab out of books. My way is generally read a chapter and then read it again and highlight the words you were uncertain about or the expressions or whatever, and then read it again and write the definitions under them. But yeah, most of the time, probably 50%, I reckon I can sort of, at least it doesn't disrupt the flow, right? But personally, it's almost like an OCD thing, obsessive compulsive disorder thing, where I'm like, I need to know every word in a sentence, or else I'm going to be like, did I understand it? Am I sure I know what that was?
Well, it's interesting. I think that study technique is actually a great combination between combining kind of enjoyment and learning, because and this is probably the part of learning that isn't the fun part. Like reading the chapter and kind of understanding, 80%. That's good, right? Because you focus more on the kind of the story, but then comes the kind of the more unpleasant part of highlighting the words and looking them up, but it's necessary, right? Necessary.
It's like going to the gym. Lifting the weights isn't the fun part. It's walking out of the gym pumped up that's the fun part, and it lasts about 2 minutes, right? It's a means to an end.
But there are sometimes moments, right? Like not very often there's moments, but there are moments sometimes where maybe you could be out on a run and you just have that moment where you're like, man, this is great.
Yeah, definitely.
Might just be 30 seconds, but
Well, and I think it comes back to the book that Mark Manson had written here. He was talking about at the end there, that idea of, I guess, like the opposite of trying to do something really quickly and just finding happiness in the moment, or at least, being pleased in the moment, and just keep chipping away at it, keep working away at it. So I'm not trying to beat myself up over the fact that I still have to look up a bunch of these words, but I'm really enjoying the fact that I can actually just read this book in a foreign language and get the gist of it, really well, and just, enjoy that process. And that's one thing I know that you love to talk about. It's always follow the fun, right? It's don't make English learning so boring that you don't want to do it. Make it so fun that you can't avoid but do it, right?
Yeah, well, I think a big part of that is kind of doing what you're doing. So, you say, well, I want to read something in English, but I want to read something I'm interested in. So obviously you want to know about this prison. This is something, because you're interested in history, aren't you?
All right, guys. So that is just the first half of this rather long interview that I had with Christian. Don't worry, it gets even better in the second half, but that will be out soon. So I wanted to chop it up because it was well over an hour in length. But yeah, this will be enough for today. Stay tuned for the next portion, which will be out soon. Thanks again for joining me, guys, and I will see you next time. Peace.